Everybody. Thank you all for being here. So ESS, Engrossed Second Senate Bill 5686 is the one that we're talking about right now. Where this bill is at right now is that it has passed the legislature and it is sitting on the governor's desk. I just checked a few minutes ago. It has not yet been signed. And the governor will have three options, really. If he doesn't sign it, it will automatically go into effect. He could sign it, in which case it will take effect 90 days after it is signed or the effective date in the statute or the bill. And the third option is a veto, which I think is unlikely, although I'm still holding out a little bit of hope. We did send a petition with, I think, well over 100 signatures on it, asking him to consider vetoing this bill. And the reason for this is that the foreclosure mediation program was created and has been running for a while to address problems in communication between mortgage lenders and homeowners. This bill effectively expands that program to bring community associations under its umbrella. The problem is that it exists to fix a problem that doesn't really exist between homeowners and community associations. And it's modeled after a lending method and an organization type with banks, mortgage lenders, that are not very similar to community associations. And essentially what the program does is it introduces additional requirements that associations have to meet before they can proceed with a foreclosure. It also includes requirements about when certain notices of delinquencies have to be sent to unit owners, how they have to be sent to unit owners, and it limits associations from being able to collect certain penalties until after they have complied with these requirements. So the notice of delinquency here is the first one. And I'm going to point out a terminology thing that's going to be confusing. Some of you may already be aware that a few years ago, the legislature adopted a bill that's now been part of our statutes for a few years, requiring associations to send a statutory pre-foreclosure notice of delinquency to owners. Initially, the requirement was that it had to be sent once. Then a couple years later, that statute was modified to require that it be mailed to these unit owners twice. And the statute actually prescribes the form that this particular notice of delinquency has to take. That is not this notice. And unfortunately, they did not choose distinct wording to call out the difference essentially between these two notices. So the notice of delinquency that is implemented or required by this bill, 5686, is a standard written notice of delinquency to the unit or lot owner. And I'm going to use the word unit across the board here because it saves time and it's easier. And also under WUCIOA, there is no distinction between units and lots. The word unit includes everybody. So just clarifying that terminology there. So under this bill, which will likely become a statute and apply to everybody, not just to WUCIOA communities, this first notice of delinquency has to be provided to the unit owners not later than 30 days after an assessment becomes past due. It also requires notice be given in specific ways that are different than every other notice that an association might send. So you have to send it by first-class mail to their on-site address within the community. Also, if they've provided an alternate mailing address, so if it's a tenant-occupied property and the owners have a different address, you have to send it there as well. And also, if you know their email address, you have to send it to them by email. So this is different than normal notice requirements, which typically only require one form of notice when you're sending things like annual meeting notices or notice of a rule change, things like that. The notice has to be in English or any other language indicated as a preference for correspondence by the unit owner. And it has to include a copy of the statutory pre-foreclosure notice of delinquency. So whatever your normal notice of delinquency usually contains, the first written notice that you send to your owners of the fact that their account has fallen behind, that's what we're talking about here. But with that notice, you have to include a copy of the statutory pre-foreclosure notice of delinquency. And as an aside, what I want to point out one thing, which is that I am aware of a lot of associations that already are not sending the pre-foreclosure notices on the schedule that's required by the statute. And currently, the statute as it exists allows an association's attorney to send that statutory notice of the foreclosure notice for the association if the association fails to send it itself on the required timeline. But Hillary, if you could jump to the next slide. One of the things that this new bill implements is that you cannot take any number of actions until 15 days after you send that first written notice of delinquency, which must include a copy of the statutory pre-foreclosure notice of delinquency. So there's some this is going to create a little bit of a conflict, right? There's one part of the statutes about the statutory foreclosure notice that gives you the right to refer an account to an attorney and have the attorney send the notice for you if you fail to do it. But this one says you cannot take any of these actions until 15 days after providing the notice of delinquency required by this bill, which includes a copy of the foreclosure notice. So it says you cannot take any other collection action, and you cannot charge an owner for any collections costs except the actual cost of printing and mailing the notice of delinquency, an admin fee of not more than $10 relating to the notice of delinquency, and one late fee of $50 or 5% of the amount of the unpaid assessment, whichever is less. So for those associations that have been unaware of the statutory pre-foreclosure notice of delinquency requirement, or that have chosen to just rely on the fact that your attorney will send it for you when you refer the account to them, you can no longer do that without running afoul of these limitations and requirements here. Associations are also going to be required to maintain what the statute refers to as pre-foreclosure information with their records, and owners are entitled to receive a free copy of that packet, essentially, a paper copy or an electronic copy in English, or again, in any language indicated as a preference for correspondence by the owner. I think, some of you probably are a little bit worried here about this whole translation requirement. I'm a little bit worried about it too, especially for small associations that don't have a lot of financial resources. The one sort of comfort that I'll offer you here is this only becomes an issue if an owner requests or tells you their preference for correspondence in a different language. So if you have a unit owner in your community who speaks English as a second language or perhaps doesn't speak English, but they don't request their notifications in a different language, that doesn't trigger a requirement to provide a translated document to them. However, if someone does submit a request to receive their communication, in particular, these communications, in their language, their preferred language, then the association does have an obligation to provide a translated copy in that other language.